And I've got this is a dummy that he did. And this is the final F and G's they're called, folded and gathered sheets. And here's the wizard, and that's I have several of the letters from the editor, and that's probably an earlier version. So I have several versions of that. And then lots of letters from the editor, which I'm going to go through carefully. And this was given to me by someone who, one of the things that Anderson himself did with these kind of paper cuts, and this was a man who was makes his living going around dressed as Hans Christian Andersen and talking about Hans Christian Andersen, and then making these little paper cuts for various, for children at bookstores and conventions. So he was kind of excited. And reviews, that sort of thing. So most of this will go over to Corinne.
Okay.
All right. Do you need anything more?
Anything else about Anderson's life that you connected to or found inspiring when you were working on it?
Anderson was a very strange man. He grew up in a very strange family. His mother was illiterate. His father was literate but didn't live very long. Anderson was still a boy when his father died. His mother filled his head with fairy tales, many of them very dark. They He had a sister who was a prostitute, probably a prostitute. A grandfather who was mad and who'd wander around with leaves in his hair, talking to the birds and things. So his family was very dysfunctional, and his mother was convinced that he was a genius. And so when he said that he wanted to go, and he hadn't done a lot of schooling, but he wanted to be a poet. And he would write, as I said, these poems and then grab people in the streets and make them listen to him. He would even go into strangers' houses just to say, "I'm a dichter, listen to me, listen to me talk." And so she gathered together enough money to send him by bus or by cart, by horse cart, I think it was, to Copenhagen, and also managed somehow to get him an introduction to someone in the theater, because he wanted to also be in the theater. So he arrived with just a few copper coins and everything that he owned in this bundle, and basically bullied his way into a place in the theater school. And they decided that he really was had some kind of talent, and they let him be in some of the plays. He had no dancing ability, but they gave him some roles, and then they decided he was not going to go anywhere unless he really got an education. So they in the school sent him off to an actual elementary school, even though he was a teenager at that point. And that's where he got a modicum of education. But then the rest of his life, when the first books he wrote, he printed them himself and sold probably half a dozen copies, and the rest they used for paper to wrap cheese in. But when he started writing the fairy tales, that's when his his life as a writer really started taking off, and he became so worldwide famous that he started to have correspondences with famous writers like Charles Dickens. And Dickens said, in sort of in passing at one point, "If you're ever in England, please come for a weekend." Well, he went to England, and he ended up staying for over a month until Dickens' children begged Dickens to throw him out, because the only thing that he liked to do was talk about himself. And he didn't speak English that well, and he would just make the children sit there and talk at them for hours. So he was not an easy person. He probably remained a virgin all of his life, not from lack of trying, but he would fall in love. He fell in love with Jenny Lind, the Swedish nightingale who sang in Northampton. And she said, "You're a very nice man. You know, we can be friends." But he wrote The Empress Nightingale, which again was very autobiographical. He fell in love with a ballerina. He wrote stories in which paper ballerinas, you know. He may have been in love with his best friend. He may have been in love with a male ballet dancer. But in those days, it would have taken a very strong personality and a great ego to be able to follow that path. These days, he might have been able to come out. These days, he might not have been writing fairy tales under those circumstances. He was so repressed emotionally that it all went into his books. So we don't know. But he did not lead a whole and wholesome life. Though when he wrote his autobiography, he started out the autobiography with, "My life is a fairy tale. Everything is beautiful. Everything is wonderful." So I don't think he ever looked very deeply into his heart and soul.